Hello and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host Greg Payne coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Guys, I've got my good friends from school and back in Northern Virginia. I've got Ted and Bob with me. And one of the things that jumped out to me and why I've asked these guys to be on the podcast is just knowing them growing up, how often they were spending time taking family trips to go see their grandfather and how many times their grandfather was coming out to see them. And so I wanted to dive in on some of those stories. So you guys are listening to this podcast are definitely going to hear some entertaining stories and are also going to hear about just how close the Roos family was, especially with their grandfather. So, guys, let's dive in and start talking about some of the early memories that you guys had of your grandfather.
Bob, you want to go? First of all, we'll state we're pro-grandfather, and congratulations to you, Greg. I think one of your first feeder questions was earliest memories.
Yeah.
So we lived with my parents and our other brother in Northern Virginia, and also a little bit in Colorado, Montana, and my grandparents lived in Santa Barbara, California. So in order to get us to come out to see them, they'd oftentimes we'd either have to fly out there or we actually drove out there a bunch of times. And so what I think was really cool, some of my earliest memories is my grandpa, when we were young, worked, but when we were beginning to be teenagers, was retired. So when we did fly out there, he was able to spend like almost every waking minute with us. And I think then that gave my mom a break because she didn't have there are three of us, three boys. She gave her a break from us. And so we would go out when they lived in California, have all sorts of crazy wild adventures, fishing. We did a lot of camping trips in the summer. So, and of course his name was Bob, and I'll toss it over to my brother, Bob, who was named in honor of my grandfather, Robert.
Yeah. So hey, Greg, thanks for having us on the podcast. And I can take this back all the way to being really young, and there's just so much energy around, Grandpa coming to visit, Grandma and Grandpa coming to visit, whether they were visiting us in Colorado where we grew up or whether they're visiting us in Montana as they were on the West Coast. But there was something fun. They had a camper, and they would show up in the middle of the night, and they would stay, and who knows how long they'd stay for, but there was something about this older man that automatically earned respect because that was our mom's father. So by default, the person was a hero of ours who raised our mom, who then is raising us. But the fact is he had these three grandsons. He raised three daughters. So I think vicariously, he knew that he was going to have an opportunity to really kind of mold and shape these three young men. And whether it was just finding out what we had in common with him, Greg, I think that was important, whether it was baseball, whether it was fishing, whether it was outdoors, or whether it was just tinkering around the house, cutting wood. So he would come visit, and there would just be something magical about those weekends. And so as I think back now as a 50-year-old myself, that takes effort, right? That requires planning, that requires money that we probably didn't have back then, that requires vacation of a job that he was probably working really hard for. That requires sacrifice. That requires commitment. And that requires getting everyone on board and packing and traveling. And then, I don't know, he probably visited us in smaller houses with, inadequate, bedrooms and bathrooms. But he just showed up in a camper, and we just thought it was the neatest thing in the world. And then to Ted's point, as we grew older, it just became this awesome moment where we were in high school and where all of our friends, middle school, grade school, where all of our friends were sort of stuck in these snowy winters. We were hopping on a jet plane or driving to this place called California. And some people didn't even know where that was on the map. This was back in the 70s and 80s. And we would then take 2 weeks worth of homework. The teachers were upset, but we were laughing all the way on the flight. And Greg, we would get out there, and I'm telling you, the biggest thing that Grandpa impressed upon me is there were no rules. You had to respect, you had to love, you had to share. But there was no kind of rules with Grandma and Grandpa, meaning, look, Ted and I used to have root beer floats at 9 a.m., Greg, right? So the secret's out. Maybe that's why, right? But it was okay to have a root beer float at 9 a.m. in the morning. Maybe not as a balanced diet, but it was something that was the grandma and grandpa rules. And that was, hey, we're going to have fun. We're going to relate. We're going to work hard. We're going to have high value, moral, and ethics, but we're going to have a good time. So that's how far I can take it. And as I think back, he had to have really planned to make those moments special for us, which is what I'm planning to do.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I found too with people that are sharing these stories is just how intentional the grandfathers are to make sure that there's a little bit of time, make sure there's some activities. And a lot of times you don't even know as a grandfather that this is going to be impacting your grandkids 20, 30, 40 years down the road.
Right.
It's just, hey, I'm going to take half a day off and we're going to go wherever. We're going to sneak out, go to King's Dominion. I'm going to do whatever. But it's being intentional about that with the grandchildren to enable that relationship and then relate and get those memories.
Yeah. I tell you, sports related, thinking back. So if he liked the Lakers, then that's how Ted and I became big Laker fans.
Okay.
And yes, he knew that we were big Yankee fans and he was a big Dodgers fan, but he would root with the Yankees with us. And so I can just remember so many times he'd come back on the West Coast and he'd be so interested in going to all of our baseball games, both Ted's games, my games, and our younger brother's Tim's games. And then he loved to help Mom cook. He loved to help, the whole family, whether it was homework. And this is someone that, was not gifted with the most amazing book intelligence, but the guy was street smart, right?
Yeah.
He was street smart. He was savvy. I can remember driving cross country with him. And this is a guy that knew what every plant was in the middle of the road and what every vegetable was on the side of the road. To my point, I need a huge sign that says, what you're looking at is spinach. He would be like, oh, yeah, that's what that is. And that's where that's grown. And you're like, fun fact 101. Yeah.
Well, and talking about the sports, because I remember when your grandfather would come out when we were still playing baseball, and he was grabbing a catcher's mitt and warming up the pitchers.
Sure.
And was diving in. And so it was the whole team kind of knew your grandfather for, the few weeks that he was out. And he was showing up to those games on Tuesday and Thursday and Saturdays and diving in, having a good time with us.
I was watching something yesterday by Ken Burns about baseball in New York. And, of course, we don't all remember this. You're glad this happened, but the Giants and Dodgers left, right, in like the 50s.
Right.
And my mom still talks about how, they were obviously sad the Dodgers left New York, but people in L.A. just went bonkers. And so I can, they were lifelong Dodgers fans.
Yeah, and I knew I liked the guy on so many different levels, sure. But especially the Dodger fan.
Sure. He would the current Dodgers. He would have enjoyed them, yeah.
And then, so to segue kind of from sports to another activity that I know that he was passionate about is he had just this passion about the outdoors and fishing and hunting and just camping. And so he grew up taking his daughters camping, and then boom, he had these sort of semi-adolescent young men. And from about the age of 10 to into our 20s and 30s, we would go, whether it would be deep sea fishing out in Santa Barbara or whether it would be go to a dude ranch in Big Sky, Montana. And so, Greg, one of my favorite stories that relates to the kind of the tenacity and grit of what all grandpas have is, he would never let us down. He would never let Ted and Tim and I down. And if he was feeling sick or even had a moment of frustration or sadness, he would never let us down. The show must go on. So I can remember this one time, we're ready to go deep sea fishing. Couldn't have been a better day for Ted and Tim and I. We're up at 5 a.m. Grandpa looks horrible, but he says, I'm good. But we're like, no, you look green. I'm good. We're about ready to go on a boat. He's shelling out hundreds of dollars that we probably didn't have for bait and poles and licenses. We get out on the middle of the ocean. The waves are going up and down, and we're all fishing, and we look over at Grandpa. We're like, aren't you having a good time? As he proceeds to, and you might have to edit this, but he is chumming aggressively overboard, Greg, okay? He is hurling McGurlin, and we later find out, Greg, the guy had the flu.
Holy cow.
Right, he went home and then had to stay in bed and had some medicine, and Grandma chided all of us. But you know what he said? He said, hey, man, the show must go on. I was going to take these boys fishing. So that was from everything to teaching us how to fly fish at age 13, taking us to these great dude ranches, riding a horse on the 70 because, when he was in 70s, because we wanted to ride horses, patiently, helping us bait hooks and take fish off and doing everything. So whether it was sports or whether it was travel or whether it was, the great outdoors, I think my biggest takeaway, and when I'm ever blessed to be a grandpa, what my wife and I say is, we want to kind of be decent in our old age. Number two, we want to pass on all of those morals and values. But number three, you have to just make that effort to be there. It's really tough to be a long distance grandpa, and phone calls are great. And God, I guess we could do Zoom meetings, but just to make an effort to be there and knowing that they're wanted and loved and needed and desired.
And Greg, I'll say, the three Roost boys very well. There was an amount of patience that you had to have too.
Yeah.
He was used to three girls. My mom was the oldest, and they were all spaced apart 5 years. So there were times where we would all go out there unattended for the summer and stay with them for like 3 weeks. And I can only imagine the patience involved, which hopefully I'll have, but we'll see. It was just interesting.
Yeah, but I also feel too that knowing your grandfather a little bit that I did was that he was also a little bit of an instigator in some of the mischief that you guys would get into. Like, I think he would feed that fire a little bit.
Sure, he had
it didn't take much with us.
Yeah, he had a good sense of humor. There was very little. I'll tell it. This is a classic Roost. Is that we'll tell a story where we weren't even at, and I'll let Bob pipe in. But it was a road trip, and he was always up for a good time. And you guys stopped to get gas with towing the trailer in the Suburban, and you guys got so sidetracked with the half-priced ice cream that you got back in the car. And guess what, Greg? You can guess what happened. Forgot to get gas. So there is a picture somewhere of all of them on the side of the road, and I think my grandma has a piece of cardboard where, with fingernail polish, she has said "need gas," and so I'll hand it over to Bob. But I mean, I think that just kind of exemplifies, when we do these road trips, it was like the Chevy Chase vacation. We were stopping at the biggest ball of twine. We were stopping at all the Stuckies. We were stopping at the half price for ice cream. It was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, Ted, that's a great story, and and that's true, and that is Greg. He did love to get in the mix-up, and that was his sense of humor. That was his, hey, I can let my hair down with these Roost boys, with my grandchildren, and that was, yeah, why not? We're in the middle of the Oregon, lava bed drives. There's half-price ice cream. Tim and I walk out with about 4 pounds of ice cream in a cup. He's loving it. His wife, our grandma, wants to know what we're going to do all that. Now we're going to get on a big sugar high. Right. And then 10 minutes later, the car dies. And you're right. We got this great ice cream as we're eating it, and now we're out of gas. And Ted's point of the story is we actually ran out of fingernail polish at the G, so the sign says need G. And so no one was stopping because they didn't know what G was. It was supposed to be gas, but Greg, you're exactly right. And I think that if you have to make up like the ingredients or the secret recipe of a good grandpa, and to the same part a good grandma, is you become relatable, right? You become germane. You become what is interested to them, because no one wants to hear stories from back hundreds of years ago, because as a teenager that might not make sense, right? So he did a really good job of getting down to our levels, and whether it was catching for us when we were pitching or baiting our hook at eye level and working out yet one more thousandths of a rat's nest, or just watching sports, being at the house. Ted, his other passion was card games. There was something where he could get lost in games. So I can remember a trip out to Santa Barbara, and the three Roost boys were probably, this close to making fires or roughing something up or breaking something. And we went upstairs, and they were playing this game called cribbage, Greg. And it looked confusing, but it was just taking up a lot of the adults' attention, taking up a lot of grandma and grandpa's attention. So just like the Roost Boys would do, we said, all right, well, we went on in this, like, teach us. And they're like, oh, this is kind of an adult game, and teas and crackers and fingers in the air. Well, we fixed that. And within 5 minutes, we were playing card games like 31 and Hearts and Cribbage and Tripoli.
Right.
And the point was that was yet one more thing that he brought into our lives, where we are now teaching our kids how to play. And it might not be the competition of the card game, but you're not on your electronics, you're not watching the television, you're not getting lost in the frustration of the current events, and you're just really spending some quality time with each other. And that, to me, was sort of what he led kind of with his compassion, and how else could he help us mold this characters that we are now.
Oh, yeah. Well, and you mentioned card games, because that was something that I was telling my wife about before this episode in conversation with you guys. Is one of my biggest memories with your grandfather and you guys, and I forget who else was around, but we were playing like penny poker or something like dime a hand, whatever it was. Nothing big, right? So we're sitting around playing that. For whatever reason, I had my hands in my lap, and your grandfather, if he had a gun, he would have hit me upside the head, or he would have knifed me. Like, I think he threatened to knife me at
hands above the table, Greg, or something like that.
Yeah, something. It was like, oh, this is getting serious now.
Yeah.
But that was one of the it's great to be threatened by your elders sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you were a renowned cheater.
That's true. I've reformed.
I don't know. You always had long sleeves, and there was stuff coming out of it.
Yeah, and I don't go to New Jersey much, and I don't go out to Vegas very often.
Yeah, that was fun. I can remember. I think he would, when he was out, he'd play with us. Whatever. It was never high stakes poker, and I think then when we were older, it would get to a point where like he and my mom would just kind of say, "Oh, we're going to bed," and then of course we'd all play until 2 or 3 in the morning or whatever. But he always he was a trooper. He always stuck in there.
Yep.
Well,
a lot of the crazy games we learned how to play were from him. So people nowadays, they play Texas Hold'em. That's all you play, and I'm like, that's fun. But that's not a very interactive poker. So I was teaching my kids the other day some of the fun games. The 7-card stud, low spade in the hole, wins half the pot, high low. There's this stuff. Follow the queen, Bob, buy the card in the middle.
Yeah.
He taught us all those games, and that's what made it fun. And then of course there was a certain level of teaching everybody else the etiquette. You know what I mean? Hands above the table, Greg, or
Yeah.
Yeah. That was important. Is that yet one more thing that he could kind of, in a card game, how incredible that you're able to use moments to teach in life.
Yeah, well, and then the conversations just around it too, right? I mean, there's a little bit of BSing that's going on, but there's a little bit, I'm sure, with you guys that he was doing some checking in on how's school going, what's going on, what fell off the Jeep this time.
How's Bob's rash? I mean, that was always big.
Yeah, we were all concerned about Bob's rash.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, I think that's for another podcast, gentlemen.
Edit that out. So you're right. That was great, and he came out for every one of our graduations, which of course, if you remember, Payne, May, June in Northern Virginia is the worst time to come out. Actually, Bob graduated after about 6 years in West Virginia, so I think the weather was kind of.
They're called doctors.
Yeah. But my graduation, I can just remember, was hot, and here are people coming over from Southern California, which is hot, but it's a air quote dry heat, and man, Northern Virginia is just swampy and nasty. So that was huge. Yeah, they were always out. I remember for birthdays they were out, and then of course we would see them for a while there. We were going out almost every Christmas, and then every summer. And then they moved from California to Oregon, which of course, funny then that you were out there, Payne. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, but our paths crossed. You were living with your dad in, I'm going to get this wrong. Was it Vancouver, Oregon? Where was that?
We were in Portland. We were in Portland.
But you were on the other side.
Yeah, Vancouver's just over the way there. But I was with when I was living out there with my dad, going to Portland State.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in Southeast Portland. And I remember you guys coming out and then joining in with bowling and a bunch of other shenanigans.
So our aunt lived, I think our aunt lived in Lake Oswego, which was literally, we could get to your place in like about 10 minutes, right?
Yep.
Because you would drive over and get us, or we would borrow a car and go scoop you and Danny up. And he was always there. And then you're right, you joined us for some bowling trips. I don't know if you ever made it out to the McKenzie River House, but
no.
Yeah, we would. I remember the times in Oregon were just fantastic hanging out there with them.
Now, how did that make you guys feel looking back at it now in those middle school, high school years that you were that close to your grandparents? You know, where some other people didn't even know them, saw them every few, years at best, but you guys were pretty tight, even though they lived across the country.
I think it was good. And then that's another thing is, we're looking back, we probably didn't thank them enough for this, but we took it for granted that Christmas and summer, somebody was buying us a plane ticket. And that was huge. If it was, hey, you guys, if you guys want to come out and visit, you're going to have to foot your own bill, I don't think we would have gone out. I mean, we were scooping ice cream with you in Baskin Robbins during the summers. We couldn't have afforded a plane ticket. So Grandpa funded a lot of our shenanigans, and that was just huge. I mean, there's no way we would have been able to get out to California, Oregon if that hadn't happened. And I will say we probably did take that for granted. And, in hindsight, would have loved to thank him more, even though we were, I think we were good grandkids. Bob will, back me up on that. So I could see where, if those trips didn't happen, you probably would have lost touch in the same way we lost touch with my dad's dad, who we just didn't see that much. You're on the East Coast and they're on the West Coast. So that was a big thing. If it hadn't been for him making the effort, which I guess will translate back to your Be a Cool Grandpa podcast, is as a grandpa, you need to make the effort. If you want to really stay in touch with your grandkids, you either have to go see them or you have to get them to come to see you. And I saw that with my own kids' grandparent. But it was tough. He's out in McKenzie Bridge, Oregon, and we're in Springfield, Virginia. You can't get much farther away from that. So,
yeah. Greg, to answer your question, it felt great. There was something comforting about knowing that you had involved grandparents. So there were times when you could call up and, double check your math homework or do a paper. I remember one of the English papers that I presented, and I was able to win a, publishing award, was about a fishing trip with my grandpa. So he was able to edit that, and we were able to embellish, of course, that a little bit. But yeah, to Ted's point, and what we might get from this is it felt great, but it really was something that I don't think we took advantage of it. We never leveraged it for any type of what's in it for me. But yeah, Ted, you're exactly right. There's probably a time where, as a grandpa, you probably need to have a grandkid slush fund. You probably have to have let me make a sacrifice here to be involved, because life does happen. And we were just so blessed, Greg, to be able to pick up and go out to Montana for a month every summer, to pick up and to go to California for Christmas, where we didn't need to have a white Christmas. We were surfing in the Pacific Ocean where everyone else was shoveling snow. So I think that we have a unique story, but I think that the other thing that Grandpa and Ted, you can relate, is Grandpa also taught us really how to be a man and how to respect women, because one thing Grandpa always did was he doted on his wife. Okay. His wife came first. And there were times when he would tell us or coach us or teach us how we could help him make her life better. Sure. So it would be, I'll give you an example of, we used to go around the country in a travel trailer, an RV or a big sort of Winnebago. And we knew exactly, Ted and Tim and I were like a NASCAR pit crew. When we parked at the great, RV stop or the campground, we knew how to set up Grandma's tent, set up Grandma's picnic table, set up Grandma's coffee maker, balance the RV, stow everything, put up the awning. And as soon as all the chores were done, then we all could go fishing or exploring. But not until he taught us exactly what it needed to do. And I think that transfers well into our life, where we then make the sacrifices where, happy life, happy wife, and our kids come first. And I think we learned that from Grandpa, the moral compass pointing very true north.
I think at my wedding, they did.
Oh, that's a great story. You got to tell that.
All right, let me see. I'm getting old, my memory. So they did a dance. It was, who here has been married for 2 or more
5
years?
Yeah.
5 years. And so basically, Greg, it was then you winnowed it down to where the people dancing were the people that had been married the longest. And at the very end, it was my Grandpa Bob and my Grandma Bernice. And the DJ came over and said, what's your secret to this long a marriage? And I think they had probably been married for over 50 years at that point. And his 2-word answer was, yes, dear. Did I get that right? And so,
yeah.
So that was good. So he was, as much as he doted on us, he also really doted on her. So, that was great. So it was, going back to Bob's camping stories, it was get Grandma all set up and happy. I think Tim was an expert on helping Grandma find her cigarettes and get those lit, get her coffee, and we could go off fishing. So, it was great. Yes, dear.
Oh, yeah. Plus, we had to catch grasshoppers for her Band-Aid.
Grasshoppers. Yeah, and dip them in chocolate. Greg remembers that. He was a big chocolate grasshopper eater. Yeah.
No, I don't remember chocolate grasshoppers.
That was like your Apocalypse Now in the tent days. The horror. Oh, sorry. Edit that out. Here, snip.
So now, how did the relationship change as you guys were getting out of high school and going into college even more? Because now it's not so much the wild and crazy teenage years. Now you guys are starting to look like at careers. You guys are starting to look at, I'll say responsible adults, but in quotes.
We would still go visit, and I think when you were out there in Portland is when we were in college or even post-college. So there were still visits. We just kind of have to coordinate and schedule. But I think then it got to a point where it was more we were, buddies or fishing buddies, and when we weren't driving the trailer around, Bob, who was just like Grandpa Bob, a solid driver, Bob would drive us to go fishing, or he would take us skiing if we were out there during the winter. So, I don't know. We were almost. It was funny. We were his buddies. We were his fishing buddies. He loved when we would come out there because then he could say, "Well, Bernice, the boys want to go fishing. I have to go with them." So that was like the excuse to go out. So he was one of our buddies. He was one of our friends. So that was one of the good things.
Well, sort of. So, Greg, the best part about this is there really was no clear delineation of when we stopped being the Crazy Roost Boys in his mind to then, to use your words, which was very generous of you, these young, responsible, getting into jobs, whether it was Ted at the bookstore, Ted going back to, get his master's degree, or Tim going into the Navy, or me working for Enterprise. We still did the Christmas trips. We still did the Montana trips. We still did the camping. He still would come back. Now, maybe he was older and we were older. Maybe we didn't stay up till 1 a.m. doing the cards. But what it would do, and here's a funny family story. Greg, we have told the same joke so many times. One of Grandpa's favorite stories is he would just say, joke 37. And we would all laugh because we knew what joke 37 was, which was some version of what we'd been told since we were 7 years old. So that was something that he was able to, if you work hard enough to earn that respect, then there's no really transition of awkward teenage angst, because he was still the cool grandpa that was there for you 100% of the time. The jobs, all he would do is just say he was proud of us. Ted, I think there wasn't a time where we didn't want to let this guy down. We didn't want to earn his respect or continue to earn his adulation. And whether it was whatever we were doing, he would ask us about it, Greg. You're right. He would keep us in check, and he would impart words of wisdom. And then maybe as he'd come back in life, we would maybe do different trips. So instead of going to Baskin Robbins on a fun, errand, we would then go down to the Smithsonian and maybe take into some culture. Sure. So as we got older, he got older and we were able to share sort of different walks in life.
And I'll say the times, and there weren't that many, but there were one or two times where we maybe did let him down. And I will say that those are probably up there in some of my biggest regrets. You know what I mean? He was not somebody that you really wanted to let down. Never got mad at us. I mean, I can remember my dad and my mom getting mad at us, and we got out of control a few times, and he never got really mad. He was very even-keeled, very patient guy. He had more patience. Greg, we would be out camping and hauling the trailer. He would drive that trailer 8-9 hours a day, just with some restroom breaks and coffee breaks and cigarette breaks, and never complained. It was just, it was a California Depression era, served in World War II kid that he rarely complained. I like complaining a lot, so I don't think I got that from him.
I think I harbor my complaints, but I do think I got a lot of my cheery disposition from him. And that's what kind of the lesson that you learn. And then Greg, as things got, our best years at the very end of his life, guess where we were? We were at his river house. We were playing poker. I went salmon fishing with him on the Willamette. And those were some of the last things he did. He never veered from his true nature. And that probably was something very comforting and solid that you could take. So
yeah,
great relationship from beginning, middle to end.
Right, and the same guy throughout the whole thing.
Sure. Yeah, very genuine. You can count on it. Very reliable. So for all the new grandpas out here, you don't have to change who you are. Maybe adapt. Maybe be versatile. Maybe have some flexibility. But I love Ted's point of you might have to make some sacrifices to stay connected and to stay involved.
I remember the random story. He was out one time, and Tim, who's our youngest brother, definitely tested everyone's patience, had bought a Mustang. Remember his Mustang?
Yeah.
Greg,
Greg, that was fast.
If you even touched the gas, that thing would leap forward. He left for school and left it behind. And for some reason, Grandpa was out, and he and I were doing something, and the car needed to be worked on or something. There was something wrong with it, and we were going to get it fixed. And I was going to follow him to the shop, and I followed him in probably the Nissan. And he drove the Mustang, and I remember him coming back just going, "Oh my God, that thing was crazy." And you couldn't see out the back window, right? And then I think the hood had caught on fire at one point. But so it must have been a hilarious thing to see this. If you're driving down the road, you're seeing this guy in his 70s zipping along this little Mustang. I think we were getting the seat fixed or something. So, but he knew how to drive stick and just had a great time. And he never, I want to say, and Bob can back me up, I don't think he ever said no to anything.
Yeah. Greg, he had a really even keeled, like Ted said, very even temperature. Look, the Roos boys would put that to the test, and all of our friends through high school and college and later on in life. And I mean, we would snap fishing poles in half. We would break windows. We would break ovens. We would break, you name it. If there was a chance that the Roos boys could fiddle with it, monkey with it, fester with it, or snap it off, we did. And typically, and we're not here to, say anything bad about, how our parents had some anger issues, but we were fully expecting there to be like, oh, and 3, 2, 1, explode. And what he would say? Okay, well, let's fix it. Okay, let's do something about it. Okay, well, we'll fish with a different line on that pole. So, Greg, that's something that you take away from that. That puts you in awe that there was no yelling or screaming or spanking. And I think he truly felt that getting that type of energy, that was going to mess up his fishing day. That was going to mess up his pancake breakfast. That was going to mess up just having a table full of his family. And so I think he found arguing or getting really upset very unproductive, and would rather than learn from something or have a coachable moment, even as a grandpa, and then move forward. And man, we learned more lessons from that guy about how to handle life and how to handle frustration and disappointment than anyone who's ever yelled at us. So take that, future grandpas, less rock, more talk.
I still, as all grandpas and dads, he had his little expressions. I still use them all the time. What is it? That and a nickel will get you a phone call. Busier than a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. What is Bob? Better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick? Or like, what does that mean? I don't even know. But
I think he said he'd rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy.
Frontal lobotomy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Classic. So it's all those grandpa-isms. And anyway, yeah, it was amazing.
Well, Greg, we still tell stories. My kids, right, who are 13 and 12, Ted's kids that are, oh my God, 21 and 19, Ted? Yeah, ridiculous. Sure. They all still remember stories. My wife, Carol, who was never blessed with meeting Grandma and Grandpa, knows stories and visited places that, they've been at and just can feel their spirit or their aura in the room because of the nature in which he left us that gift of being a good grandpa.
You had their dining room table in your dining room for years.
Absolutely. We were sitting on chairs that they had bought in Ethan Allen, 60, 70 years ago. So that says something. Ted, you got his ruby sapphire ring, when he had passed away.
Darn it. You got all of Grandpa's old underwear. I think you still wear them, don't you?
Well, yeah, but it didn't specify that in the will, but I chose to do
they said Bob on them, so it was just kind of like, okay.
Right, that was just given. Yeah. It was assumed.
It's just given. Yeah. You're right. I misremembered that. My bad.
Marks and all.
So
I can edit that out.
I mean, you guys have given a lot of advice for grandpas, but what's some of the final takeaways? Are there anything about your relationship with your grandfather that we haven't touched on?
I mean, I think it adds another variable to your life. Your parents. You remember my mom, Greg. She was in the heyday. Part of the reason why we could do fun stuff at my house is she was never around, right? She was always working. So my dad was divorced and got remarried. So that was another level of a relationship. And I'm sure, looking back, if they hadn't been in our lives, it would have been less rich. I mean, I've taught my son how to fly fish. I don't think we would be fly fishermen, Bob, if it hadn't been for Grandpa. We would just be casting lures out, which everybody can do. I don't think we would be baseball or basketball fans. Anyway, and all the cards and games, and always thinking about fun adventures. Grandpa brought the big fun adventures into our life. The family road trip and the family truckster going to Wally World. So, I mean, it was all that fun stuff. I could easily have seen, when you look at your life and you look at those branches, if they had got to the point where they weren't able to, had not wanted to, or couldn't afford to have us visit them, it would have just been a different path. Tim would have definitely ended up in prison. That's 100%.
More than once.
Yeah.
So, Greg, I would say, I think that in sort of our types of stories and lengths of stories and passion on the stories, I do believe we hit it all. But I'd want to just sort of empower all future grandpas or current grandpas that title of grandpa, that comes with honor. That's bestowed on you. And I think it's as important as having a PhD, having an MD. It should go right next to your name and your signature that says grandpa, because there's a level of responsibility that you owe not only to your kids, right, which be our mom, but then you just have this responsibility to make sure that generation of your grandkids is learning and seeking, and don't give up, and have moments of wins and victories, but just it's all got to come from a place of love. So you probably have to be a nice person in order to have raised a kid. In order to have raised a kid, that person has to have then procreated. And then it should be a natural progression that it's like, this is my grandpa, this is my grandpa, they're awesome, and then you got to take it from there. Greg, I've listened to some of your podcasts, and there's a lot of great stories out there, and there is no book. Right? There is no book that says Dr. Sears did not write a book on grandpa, and the book he wrote on parenting was way off. Right?
Right.
So a lot of it is just compassion, 1 ounce compassion, an eighth of respect and admiration, probably some Baileys, probably some, it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Right.
And just making sure that you're there. I think we mentioned on earlier, Greg, and you're doing a great job of this, is you're just there. Maybe you travel, maybe you're there. You don't interrupt, you don't butt in, you don't interject, but you're there. You're there waiting in the wings to impart great wisdom, because the grandpa stories truly are important and can translate into current modern times. So
Yeah.
I think we hit it all.
And I think I would add that he led by example, right? So that's the old Boy Scout thing, right? Lead by example. I don't think he ever told us what to do necessarily, but he just showed us how he lived his life. So anyway, it was that was kind of a cool thing. There was never, I don't think we ever got to the point where it was, we don't want to spend another 3 weeks in Oregon. It was something we looked forward to just because of the adventures and stuff like that. So hopefully that's something that I know Bob and I both will do this. Hopefully we can, carry that on with our kids and their kids, is just, keep imparting that sense of fun and adventure and kind of living life to your fullest and doing fun things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ted, don't you remember? As I look back in life, Greg, our mom would drop us off at the airport for a month. And I wondered why we were sad because we were missing her, but she was smiling at the airport.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that is a weird emotion. Now, as I look back, like, the grandpas can give the parents a break, whether it's a local babysitter, whether it's a emergency contact, whether it's a pickup out of school, or just being there, for daycare. But there was a time where we were like, man, I bet mom must have loved that. She missed us and she adored us. But there was just a time where she could be like, how awesome that my parents were able to spend this time with my kids. So that's something that we're definitely looking forward to. And I think that, Ted, our mom and our dad, for the most part, have done a great job. I would give them better grades as grandparents as parents. And maybe it's because as you get older, it's easy to go back and say, if I wrote a book about my grandparents, I would title it, "It's Okay to Have a Root Beer Float at 9:30.
Yeah. Chapter 1. And I will just piggyback. I can remember Mom dropping us off at Dulles or National, and the car wouldn't even stop. It would just be doors out. Tim would go skidding down the road. But yeah, that was awesome. That was a long flight too. We have some good airline stories with Tim, but when you have, Greg, when you have your Crazy Brother podcast, you get us back on there. We'll.
I might start that up.
Because you have a few brothers yourself, don't you? You have like 9 brothers.
I do. I've got half a dozen.
Well, so what else do you need from us, Greg? Because there's just a lot of love. I love sharing stories about our grandpa.
How do you like being a grandpa, Gregory?
Oh, I've been loving it. Now, my grandson Charlie is like 2.5 years old.
Chuck?
No, but may slide into that.
Good. Okay. All right. So Charlie, sorry I interrupted you there. So Charlie, okay.
Yeah. So Charlie, and then we've got Nora. She's about 6 months at this point.
Remind me whose kids are those?
Charlie is RJ's.
RJ.
Nora is Steven's.
Gosh.
So,
and we've known you so long. I remember your kids as kids. It's just phenomenal. Bob got one of them to dip his head in a bucket of ice water. Remember that? That was crazy.
That's probably the least worrisome thing. Yeah.
Yeah, we had bubbles shooting out of his nose.
Well, and he probably loved it.
Yeah, he did.
So you're now they're up here, right?
Yeah, they're both in Virginia. We get
they're
to
like a big commune farm thing or something, right?
Right.
Like Mennonite type situation.
Out in Linden. So they're out by where 66 and 81 come together.
Wow.
And they're living up on a mountain, survivalist kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I know you were up here. Well, you were trying to be, but next time when we all get vaccinated, definitely let us know next time you're up here.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. So, and then how old is Chuck and Nora?
Chuck is 2.5, and Nora's about 6 months now. Wow. I think something like. She was born in August.
So that's the other thing I was saying. Bob's probably getting there. Is that I have people on my work will say, "Oh, the kids are driving me crazy today." I'm like, you know what? Enjoy it. We just dropped Katie off at school, and it's just quieter than a church mouse here, and it's sad. I loved having the kids around. So same thing as a grandpa, enjoy that's a great age, when they start toddling around and calling you. Do they call you Pop or Grandpa Greg? What do they call you?
I think just Grandpa.
Grandpa? That's great.
Yeah, just Grandpa right now. And I've got him, we've got him in full-blown Cowboys gear. So
see, now Bob, that's going to be where he talks about his grandpa and like torturing him, making him put on Cowboys gear.
Yeah, that could backfire, Clark. That could backfire, sir.
That's going to backfire.
He looked good. Little Michael Irvin jersey that he was wearing.
Oh wow, I could really derail you, Michael Irvin. Yeah, all right, podcast listeners, Google Michael Irvin and when he got arrested. Let's
Snow Queen.
Yeah, the Cowboy stuff. Can't you just go more neutral? Put him in some
the Chiefs
stuff or something,
or like the George Mason. The Patriots.
Undefeated, sir. Undefeated.
So, well, guys, stay on the line, but let's go ahead and we'll wrap this up. And
wrap it up.
I've appreciated you guys sharing your experience with your grandfather, and this has been awesome. So thank you guys.
You bet, buddy.
All right, thank you, Greg. Our pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.